For me, actually, in many ways, I don't see it as a Chernobyl novel. I see it as a novel about the breakdown of a political system, but it's about people living their lives in the midst of immense political and social change, and how institutions can affect just your day-to-day life, the way you speak to your neighbour, the habits that you have when you wake up in the morning, how we are affected by forces that are so much greater than us, even though that we think we're very independent people. I don't know, really. I mean, you never know why you start writing something. Something that definitely was significant, and I'm sure was important for me, was that there's an Irish charity in Ireland called Chernobyl Children International, and they bring over children for recuperation. So they might spend a summer in Ireland, which would essentially prolong their lives and help their internal organs. So they would have come to my town when I was maybe 12, 13, and they wouldn't have had the normal kind of problems that you would associate with children from Chernobyl. And on the outside they looked completely fine, but it was respiratory problems that they had, and we were very intrigued by them. We were 12 or 13, so that was kind of a good age. The girls were kind of our age, and they were very beautiful. They had this kind of Slavic beauty, and we were kind of all about that. But we'd hear little stories about their lives. So the apartments that they lived in, they lived in those kind of monolithic Soviet tower blocks. And where I'm from is a very flat place, so I think the tallest building is 2 or 3 stories high. So that in itself was very interesting, that they were almost living in the sky. And then later I saw a documentary about Chernobyl, about the farmers who returned to the region and who were living in the contaminated areas around the plant. And that was very intriguing to me. My father's a farmer, and that sense of home, that sense of fidelity to the land was something that I understood, even though it sounds so odd that people would willingly put their lives at risk just to live in the place that they were from. So the accident happened when I was 7, and I have no memory of it at all. It actually happened on my birthday, or just near my birthday, a couple of days afterwards. But I do remember the wall coming down, the Berlin Wall falling, and something I do remember very strongly is the language that was kind of in the air at the time. On the radio, you would hear words like the Iron Curtain or the Velvet Revolution. And there was this kind of sense that Russia and the Soviet Union was this land somewhere out there. It was almost like a sense of the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, that C.S. Lewis book, where that behind the wardrobe there's something quite mystical or magical happening there. And even on the maps in our school, the Eastern Bloc would be in a different colour, and so it was something I was always intrigued about. But the accident itself I don't remember, but I do remember quite quickly after that getting a sense of the other side of the continent being significantly different, and being curious about it. I think I was pretending to myself for a long time that I wasn't writing a novel about Chernobyl, so I would read about it because I was interested, and the more I read about it, the more I became very, very curious, and things emerged. I realized it was a very surreal event, that nature became distorted around the plant, and the forest nearby became autumnal. There's forests that they call the red forests very near the plant, which the leaves dropped off the trees overnight and became red, and just that sense of nature becoming distorted was very compelling, and I realized that it would make a really good subject for a book. And then maybe I started writing about Moscow because I was very intimidated about writing it, and it gradually momentum built and momentum built. Michael Ondaatje is a writer I really love, and he has a line. He says that a poet justifies nothing except the poem. And so I think it's always dangerous to write literature with an agenda, partly because it weighs it down, but also partly because that's not necessarily the function of literature. So I didn't sit down and write this with an agenda. It wasn't, it wasn't a mission to kind of bring the horrors of nuclear power to a generation. But having said that, through my research, things do become apparent. Some of the things that become apparent is that we've never felt the need to look at a long-term study of radiation on the human body. And there have been so many nuclear accidents up until this point that you would have to wonder, is that a sin of omission? You know, in other words, we just don't want to know, it's convenient. You know, I think the truly shocking thing about nuclear power is the length of time that it lasts. You know, it takes, I think I'm right in saying it takes 400,000 years for plutonium to lose its toxicity. So we are creating materials that are going to last with that vast, immense timescale, and we're not putting any thought into it whatsoever. And I think the other thing that has come out for me is the idea of an acceptable dosage is just untrue. The nuclear industry is an industry that is very linked with the defense industry and military capabilities. Mm-hmm. And it's regulated by governments. You know, all overseers are government appointed. All kind of external examiners are government appointed. So there really is no independent expert who can give you an honest opinion on nuclear power. And because of the ferocity of it and the length and the time span of it, that's incredibly concerning. So All That Is Solid Melts Into Air is the English title. And it's drawn from Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto. And so he was writing about, you know, he was writing about the end of that kind of bourgeois society and predicting revolution in a way. But I think the phrase stands true for the end of every kind of era or epoch in history, that we think that we're surrounded by certainties and yet we're not. Very quickly, you know, change comes in and we realize that everything that we had presumed and all our prejudices turn to dust, essentially. Marx is very complex in his writing. He's, you know, he is very difficult to understand, but he's a great sentence writer. Some of his sentences are very, very beautiful.